Nothing like chilling out in the break room with my best friend Glep. Hey, right, Glep?
Hello.
Can I help you?
I'm a smiling friend self-insert OC. Is that enough to be considered clever satire?
What? Are you talking to me?
I got a bob strapped to my chest! Oh my god! Smiling Friends is the best animated comedy on TV, and it's not even close. And I know. Wow, Brad, what an original take. You got any more? Yeah, here's a good one. Shut up. But as redundant of a claim as that may seem, it's for a good reason. In an era of cartoon satire plagued with a style of comedy largely comprised of boring quips and forced pop culture references, it's refreshing to see something like Smiling Friends execute its comedy so well. Along with being a very funny show, it's also much more visually interesting compared to its contemporaries, blending several different mediums of animation into a super unique aesthetic. Of course, this is all commonly understood by now, but with the recent announcement of Season 3 being the conclusion of Smiling Friends, I predict the conversation surrounding the show will evolve into what legacy it will leave behind. Having 3 stellar seasons of television under its belt, Smiling Friends was no longer Adult Swim's fresh new experiment with no guaranteed future. It's now become a staple among the network's greatest hits, a point further bolstered by its mimetic influence on the mainstream internet. Additionally, with seasons 4 and 5 having been initially greenlit last year, it'd become increasingly clear that Smiling Friends was not going to leave the pop culture consciousness anytime soon. However, the steady rise of popularity had brought with it some concerns from many fans of the show. Having been on the air for what was approaching 4 years now, people were starting to wonder if we were in the golden years of Smiling Friends, meaning that pretty soon we would have seen a noticeable drop-off in quality, and that the show would have succumbed to the same fate as something like The Simpsons. Noticeably unfunnier, its satire not nearly as clever, and its beloved cast devolved into caricatures of themselves. A more relevant example would be something like what happened to Rick and Morty, a mix of scandals, an obnoxious fan base, and audience fatigue that has turned what was once Adult Swim's de facto mascot into a show that many feel has overstayed its welcome. But now, with the knowledge that Smiling Friends is effectively ending at the peak of its popularity and acclaim, there's no longer the risk of the show losing steam. Assuming that Smiling Friends never returns in some form or another, it will be immortalized as one of the greatest animated comedies ever, without the baggage of being attached to one or several disappointing seasons. Now, I'm not saying that showrunner Zach Hadel and Michael Cusack wouldn't have been able to live up to the stellar reputation of their show going into season 4 and beyond, but what I can say is that I believe there are 3 key factors that make Smiling Friends work, and if any one of them were at risk of being neglected due to burnout or relinquishing creative control to someone else, then I think stopping while you're ahead is probably one of the most courageous things you can do as a showrunner. So let's talk about the variables that contributed to Smiling Friends' success, and what might have been lost had the show persisted. The first one being characterization. Look at me and my big words. In a previous video, I examined a controversial animated comedy released by the Daily Wire called Mr. Bircham. In said video, I explained how writing a protagonist of your show to be abrasive and unlikable without the show recognizing him as such can be a big problem, and I directly compare that with how much better written a character like Hank from King of the Hill is. Now, I think the 2 main characters in Smiling Friends, Charlie and Pim, are characterized in a way that makes them very endearing, but I'm going to take a different approach in this video and focus more so on how, despite the absurdity of the show, their personalities stay intact and aren't at the expense of a joke. To best illustrate what I'm talking about, let's take a look at my personal favorite character, Charlie.
You kissed your dad in the mouth?
Now, I find Charlie Dompler to be a very interesting character for a few reasons. For one, he makes up one half of a pretty recognizable trope used in entertainment called the odd couple trope. It's a dynamic that pairs 2 characters together because their personalities sharply contrast, often made clearer if it's composed of a big guy and a little guy. Whereas Pim will take on the role as the unwavering optimist who focuses on having a positive outlook on life, you'd expect Charlie to take on the role of an equally out there pessimist. And while he does have moments of commensurate cynicism, it doesn't exactly embody who he is. This is further validated by Charlie's occupation, being a smiling friend, which is a social worker of sorts whose job is to help their clients smile. As a matter of fact, Charlie and Pim's line of work might be what shows us their dynamic the clearest. Take the season 1 episode where Pim and Charlie are tasked with helping someone dealing with a breakup. Pim suggests trying to get them back together by having him be honest with his feelings, whereas Charlie advocates for getting his life back on track by taking him to the gym, buying stylish clothes, and getting a tan.
Wow, look at that. You've got that iconic shrimp glow that everyone's talking about.
In a Season 3 episode, you see the same framework. Pym tries to provide reassurance to a balding wizard that there's nothing wrong with going bald and that he should just own it.
Look, I think you're thinking about it too much. I don't even think people notice.
Oh, wait, let me guess. Just shave it off and accept it, right?
Yeah, if like just own it. Like
Yeah.
A lot of people go bald and they just own it.
But then Charlie, on the other hand...
Oh, that's your problem? Dude, you don't need schmalugals. You just need, like, finasteride and minoxidil. If I never got on medication, I would be fully bald at this point. I'd be like that guy right there.
And you see this dichotomy with how they approach problems all the time in the show. The contrast between Charlie and Pym doesn't come from a strictly optimist versus pessimist lens, but rather one that looks more like this. One side that prioritizes emotional intelligence, inner growth, and virtues such as gratitude and forgiveness, while the other side prioritizes practical, tangible solutions that targets the external. Despite Pym and Charlie's respective roles in the show being arguably equal in importance, Charlie's instinct to rely on external coping strategies plays into another reason I like him, which is that he's extremely relatable. Despite being a big yellow cartoon homunculus creature, he's still like just a guy, and plenty of the show's humor comes from that subversion. Charlie inhabits a world that is chaotic, incohesive, and insane, with creatures that look like this and this and this. But despite all of that, he's a Catholic. Charlie also likes Roman history and is jaded toward American politics. He doesn't have a Squidward level of animosity toward his job, but he'll still call in sick to play a video game that just came out. He's concerned about his weight, has favorite restaurants, and he has a girlfriend, albeit one that shows up like once per season. Charlie is an excellent microcosm of what makes Smiling Friends hilarious, and I think Zach Hadel does a good job describing the humor of the show on the Creator Unknown podcast.
But just that joke of these blue and green characters sitting there, but they're breathing and their chests are they're just real. That's the joke. Like they blink and they have heart problems and they have ADD and they're like these characters don't hit a wall and they flatten out. They're like they have real. If you hit a character in the head with a hammer, they would have like a seizure.
The humor of Smiling Friends largely comes from its cast acting like themselves in response to the absurdity of its setting. You'll see the opposite in a show like Family Guy, where Peter Griffin is initially characterized as a bumbling, lazy idiot, but one that loves his family. A family guy, if you will. However, that aspect of his character will often be sacrificed on the altar of comedy. And that's not to say that I don't sometimes find Family Guy to be funny, because plenty of it is. But if your show's priority is to serve the punchline at the cost of everything else, then I don't find any reason to value it any more than a Family Guy Funny Moments compilation on YouTube. And considering a large chunk of Family Guy's jokes aren't reliant on the context of an episode's premise, it's no wonder many people treat it the same. Although characterization is an important part of why I love the show, I'll argue the second element of Smiling Friends' critical success is just as important, which is its clever and measured use of satire. Using humor to poke fun at facets of real life is an art form, and it's one that I find Smiling Friends will often excel at. Like I said before, the world of Smiling Friends is completely psychotic, but it'll still mirror our world in a lot of ways. They have famous celebrities, late-night talk shows, DDR machines, house parties, religion, anime, fast food mascots, Joe Rogan, board games, out-of-touch CEOs, incompetent world leaders, and Super Monkey Ball for the GameCube. This funhouse mirror of our world lets the show borrow people, places, and ideas from real life while still keeping its identity as an absurdist comedy. But of course, to achieve effective satire, it's not enough to simply reference real things in your show. Something I've noticed with a lot of modern animated comedies is the insistence to invoke very current and specific subject matter. Now, this isn't a problem in and of itself, but when your subject of ridicule is largely trend-driven, then there's a risk of your show becoming dated or unrelatable. We saw this pretty recently with the trend of TV shows having this weird fixation on Amazon delivery drones, as if it was an extremely common example of the convenience of modern tech going too far. I mean, I don't think I can tell you the last time I've seen a drone in real life. Whoa, look at that, there's one right there, check that out. If you compare that to Smiling Friends, the show will sometimes satirize very contemporary aspects of life, but it will do so in a much more relatable way, because instead of poking fun at the subject matter itself, it'll observe the relatable and familiar human interactions that come from it. Here's an example of what I'm talking about.
Have you tried,
Oh, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, it's unlocked. You can come in. Just right over there. Yeah, right over there. That's fine.
I didn't know if you were this place or the one next to
Yeah, I think it's just something to do with the way the address shows up in the app. I mean, it's not a problem. Don't even worry about it.
I just need to take a picture of the food really quick.
Yeah.
if that's okay.
All good.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yep, thanks.
Good night.
You have a good
Thank
one.
you. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas. Sorry, you were saying something?
You have the Lord of the Underworld order fast food from what is quite obviously a reference to Uber Eats, but instead of making that the focus, the attention is put upon the rather awkward conversation that arrives from it. You can read into this gag as much as you want about how the show feels about delivery app services, but what I enjoyed in particular was seeing Satan get offended at the delivery guy saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. It's good stuff. That one really tickled me. That was good. This more implicit approach to utilizing satire leads into my next point about Smiling Friends, which is that it doesn't feel like its messaging is lazily shoehorned into the narrative. And I know that's a funny thing to say about the shut your brain off Adult Swim cartoon, but Smiling Friends does have things to say. It just does so in service of its comedy and not at the expense of it. The opposite can be a glaring issue in shows like the previously mentioned Mr. Bircham, where you'll have a recurring character meant to act as a boring straw man for woke ideology. This sort of shamelessly explicit messaging is also present in modern episodes of The Simpsons, which can be similar in how bluntly it mocks its subject matter.
No! SJW stands for Social Justice Warriors. That's what right-wing trolls call anyone who
this
cares
show
about
used to be
positive
goated.
social
I don't know what
change.
happened. Now let's take a look at Season 1, Episode 2 of Smiling Friends. This is the episode where Pim and Charlie are tasked with repairing the public image of a famous celebrity after he nearly eats a TMZ reporter, and it's obvious that this show is satirizing real-life celebrities and aspects of show business. You can see clear allusions to detached studio executives, harmful vices, and celebrity worship, but it's not exhausting in its observations. Your takeaway from this episode can totally be how we shouldn't idolize famous people, or that cynical executive meddling can destroy something that used to be adored, but your takeaway could just as easily be that Zach and Michael wanted to make a silly character for their show who was a psychopath frog capable of blowing up the moon and conquering the planet. The show can have things to say and, at the same time, not take itself too seriously, and I find that very refreshing. At the beginning of the video, I said that there were 3 factors of Smiling Friends that contributed to the show's success, but I believe the third and final one might be the most integral to the very DNA of the show, that being its guest appearances. Now that may sound like a pretty shallow reason to like a show, but Smiling Friends will integrate people outside of their team of animators and voice actors in a way that's far more meaningful than a simple cameo. And sure, the show will have a fun voice cameo here and there, but what I want to look at more specifically are the times it purposefully featured artists and animators that made their name as independent creators on the internet. For example, in Season 1, there was an episode that featured a character named Mip, who was clearly animated and designed to be reminiscent of Bilbo from the 1977 animated Hobbit film. Although the showrunners could have probably outsourced the uniquely animated character to a studio, they got Harry Partridge, a talented animator who's been making videos as early as 2004 on Newgrounds. Season 1 also utilized the talent of Chris O'Neill, known online as OniNG, to make the 3D sculpt of the devil in the finale, and he was also credited with creating the closing theme that plays at the end of every episode. In the Season 2 premiere, they had the help of Hulapi, a 3D artist known for his style that's heavily inspired by low-poly PlayStation 1 era graphics. He designed and did the motion capture for the retro-looking video game character Gwimbly, and as a fan of his previous work, it was awesome to immediately recognize his style. Season 3 had what was probably my favorite guest creator to work on the show, being the artist Cosperry. His work bears a striking resemblance to animated Disney and Don Bluth films from the 80s, and he got to design the character Squim in the episode Squim Returns. With so many influences from so many different people, Smiling Friends isn't just an animated comedy on Adult Swim, but it's also become a celebration of some of the most talented and creative people on the internet, who may not have otherwise gotten the opportunity to work on such a popular show. The cast of Smiling Friends always working with indie creators contributes to the identity of the show in a big way, and considering that both Zach and Michael got their start as animators from Newgrounds, I'm convinced it was fully intentional. Smiling Friends is a show that I've been following for 6 years, and ever since I saw the pilot back in April of 2020, I felt like I couldn't get enough of it. The humor, characters, and art style all felt so novel compared to anything else on TV that it felt like a miracle that it ever got greenlit. And in a way, it was. With how difficult it is to have a pilot be picked up by a major network, it's no wonder why so many online creators choose the path of relying on the generous support of fan funding to produce a show themselves. But now with the massive success of Smiling Friends, maybe networks will take a chance on more online creators, because at the end of the day, Smiling Friends, at its core, is a show made by the internet. So while it is sad to see the series conclude, the impact that Smiling Friends had could remain for much, much longer. Yuck, the script is way too sappy. Nacho, do you think that was too sappy? Yeah, that's what I thought. We gotta find another way to end this video. Oh my